Yeah, do it again. All right. That was very beautiful. So thank you guys so much for coming, especially when you do have multiple young children. I know how hard it is to get childcare and get out of the house, but thank you for like just taking this time to kind of invest in yourselves and your parenting and your kids. So I just know how hard it is to get away. So I'm excited you guys are here. All right, so this is my introduction of myself. His was way better, but that's my family. It's my husband, Brian. My kids are almost 10, 8 and 2.5. And yeah, that's basically, Evan did a much better job than I usually do introducing myself. And then, so since I have all of this great education and experience, my kids are like always perfectly well behaved, and right, like everywhere we go, it's like super easy. They're always perfect. No, right? So my kids are also little humans that make lots of mistakes and act crazy sometimes. And so the goal of this training, and in general, what I do is never to like try to somehow make our kids into like little perfect things, because they can't. Like their brain's not fully developed. That's just like not a reasonable thing to ask of them. But what we can do is change ourselves, and we can change what we are doing and find what works best for our kids to kind of get the results that we want. So that's what we'll be talking about. But I just want to recognize that we are all imperfect people. Our kids are imperfect people, right? We're all doing the best we can. All right, so we're going to kind of go through 3 parts of this training tonight. And the first one is we're going to talk about kind of what behavior is and kind of perspectives on our behavior, kids' behavior. We're going to talk about kind of how to prevent some of the challenging behaviors that we see, and then also what to do when they do happen. All right. And so this is like pretty informal, right? If you guys need to like go to the bathroom, just go to the bathroom. If you need some water, like whatever you need to do. If you have questions, I'll try to save time at the end for questions, but usually it's a little better, like ask them when they come up. So just interrupt me if you have a question and we'll talk about it. We have a kind of a small group, so I might be able to get into a little bit of the more specifics, but sometimes there's going to be like questions that are just really specific to like one of your kids. And so there will be a chance kind of at the end for you guys to have like just a free, like I do free mini coaching sessions for people that come to these trainings. So if you have a lot of like individual questions for your kids, we'll just set up like a 25-minute totally free call where I can like answer all your individual questions, but hopefully we'll have time to get to a lot of them tonight too. And then I will also send you all these slides after if you want, so don't worry about like trying to get it all. Okay, so to start, we're just going to take a couple minutes. I want you to think of 3 times in the last week or day where you've had a challenging situation with one or all of your kids. And make a note on your phone, maybe try to remember it, but we're going to kind of keep coming back to that tonight. So if you have like a little notepad or whatever you want to do, I'm sure Dr. Evan has some scratch paper somewhere if you want to write it down. But just think of 3 challenges that you've had recently, like situations that you'd want to fix or do better at. Does anybody want scratch paper?
Yes, do you guys want the paper? Here.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And you don't have to share what they are if you don't want to. You're welcome to if you can. I'm not going to make you.
Just got one for each couple of covers. Nice.
And you guys can each pick different ones if you want to, so it's totally up to you. There's been no challenging times recently.
I'm sure there is.
Hard time. Thinking about it. Yeah. It's hard. It's the end of the day. You're sitting. This is like maybe the first time you've sat down all day, right? So, yeah.
I'm trying to think of situations rather than like behavior things. Like, okay. There's this behavior, but
yeah,
not like an actual situation.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's helpful if it's like this happened recently. Like you can like see a picture in your head, like there was this tantrum, or they refused to do what they wanted, or like if you yelled or did something you didn't want to do, you could just kind of think about.
More like behavioral.
Yeah, that's great.
Like, is that
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever you can think of. And then if you can think of like a recent time where that's happened, but even just stubbornness will work. You guys got it back there?
Yeah.
Lots of ideas?
Lots of things just within 3 hours.
All right. I get it. I was like, wow, I could think of 3 things today also. So no, I'm with you. It's been one of those days for me. All right. So now just hold on to those and we're going to keep coming back to those as we talk. So if we talk about behavior, we're going to start, we're going to start with like adult behavior. And so this is kind of how I view parenting. A lot of us become parents, right? And there's no manual, there's no training, we just become parents. And so usually your parenting style or the tools that you have are usually whatever tools that your parents had. Kind of however your parents raised you is how you learned to parent. And so those are kind of the tools in your tool belt. And so I like to buy IKEA furniture, right? And so you buy IKEA furniture and you just need one tool to put it all together. You need the little Allen wrench and all the furniture turns out fine with one tool. And sometimes we try to approach parenting like that. We're like, these are the tools I got from my parents. And maybe they only had 1 or 2 tools because that was what they had, that they did the best they could. And I'm going to take the same Allen wrench and I'm going to use this to put together my children, right? And then we find that it's not working so well. And the reason for that is because our kids are not IKEA furniture, right? Our kids are like beautiful custom furniture pieces, right? Like I don't even know all the other tools you would use, but they are beautiful, intricate, very complicated pieces of furniture. And there's not one tool that is going to work for one child all the time. And definitely if you have multiple kids, you know that like a tool that might work with one kid is not going to work with the other kid because usually they all tend to be very different. And so sometimes we just find that we have these tools that we came with, right, from our parents. And I've never really worn a tool belt, but I like the analogy. So I'm imagining my tool belt. So I have these 2 tools I got from my parents. And then now I have these 2 or 3 humans and I'm trying these tools and they're not working. And the truth is it's not my kids' fault that I don't have the right tools. It's not really my fault right now that I don't have the right tools. That's what I came with. But as the adult, I have the privilege of going out and finding more tools. So going to Home Depot, right, and shopping, okay, what other tools do I need for this special project that I'm making? Because each kid is so unique and special. And so that's part of my passion and what I help parents do is just have so many more tools in your tool belts. So when you approach, your kid's tantruming on the floor, right, you're like, all right, I got my big full tool belt, like which tool is going to be best to use today for this moment. And you're going to get much better results the more tools that you can use consistently and effectively with your kids. Does that make sense? All right. So perspectives on kids' behavior, right? So we have a hard time managing our emotions, making great choices, and our brains are like fully formed, right? But like, we don't eat healthy, we don't work out consistently, we have a lot of bad habits as adults. And so our kids have all those same human tendencies, but also their brain's not actually fully formed, right? The part of your child's brain that forms first is all of the emotional, like gut responses, like survival instincts, which is why your kids are all emotional all the time about little things. The rational part of a human's brain is not fully formed till age 25. Right? So when kids are little, like they literally don't have the physical structure in their brain to be making like rational, like wise decisions for themselves, which is why like a lot of what we do is like try to keep them alive, right? Like they do very unreasonable things. And so usually the reason behind their behavior is not because they're bad kids, because they're trying to annoy you, they're doing it on purpose to get under your skin. They're doing it because they're trying to communicate something to you and they don't have a better way of doing it yet, right? They haven't developed enough yet. They don't have their tools and skills yet to communicate that in a better way. So anytime I have a child with any kind of behavior coming to me, the question I want to answer is, what are they trying to communicate? Right? What need are they communicating by this behavior? I don't like the behavior, So my job is to find out what they're trying to get out of it and how can I teach them a better way to meet that same need, right? So that's why, like with adults, you don't just say, okay, we'll just stop, with addiction, right? You don't say we'll just stop drinking, stop smoking. Often like what works is like, okay, well, why is that person, using that drinking, smoking or whatever? Okay, let's address that. And that's going to make it a lot easier, right? It's like an adult example, but with kids, right? If kids can't talk, they're going to cry, yell, hit, bite, whatever, because they can't tell you what they need. They're going to, as humans, we find other ways to get those needs met, but often we just don't pick the most like helpful or healthy ways, right? The next thing is just behavior is being developmentally or age appropriate. So we kind of already talked about the brain and where it is developing. Sometimes what we're asking of our kids just isn't really appropriate based on their age or their developmental level, right? So sometimes if we do want I'll be like, oh, people will come to me and be really concerned that their 3-year-old isn't sharing, right? They're like, my 3-year-old doesn't share. They're going to be like a selfish adult. I don't know why I'm raising this entitled child. And it's like, nope, they don't share because they're 3, right? They're still learning. That's a much more complicated task. We want to give them lots of chances to practice that and learn that skill. But like 3-year-olds usually don't know how to share yet. We're like working on turn taking and stuff. And so a lot of what I can help parents do also is just kind of know what is appropriate to expect of your child, right? Versus kind of what do we want them to do, think they can do. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. I feel like, okay. So there's a kind of like 3 things we look at when we look at behavior. We look at what happened right before the behavior, what the behavior actually is, and then what happened right after the behavior, okay? And then we kind of plan based on all of those things. So there's some strategies that you guys can be doing, and most of these are human strategies too, for the people that have older kids here. There's things that you guys can be doing all the time, no matter what's happening, that will make it more likely for your kids. Hello, welcome. Oh, no worries. We're so happy you're here. Have a seat. We're just happy you made it. So yeah, just grab a seat right there. So if you can use strategies that prevent a problem behavior from happening, or maybe make it less intense, it ends a little bit sooner, it's not as bad, then everyone wins, right? I didn't even we avoided the tantrum altogether. Wonderful. So these are my favorite strategies. It's not possible to always avoid all challenging behavior because like we said, we have little humans that are not perfect and they're going to make mistakes. But we really do want to focus on being proactive and what we can be doing all the time to just really foster more positive behaviors in our kids, okay? So these are the first tools I'm going to talk about. And if you imagine it, this is kind of like why, you put the helmet on your kid before, right? So if they fall, it won't be so bad. We put sunscreen on so they won't get sunburned. We put the life vest on so if they fall in, it won't be so bad. We are in the habit of doing these preventative things with our kids. And I'm going to teach you behavioral things you can do that will prevent some challenging behaviors with your kids. So the 2 tools we're going to talk about is focusing on the good and then having clear expectations and instructions. Okay, so focusing on the good. This is honestly my favorite all-time strategy for parenting and for life in general, okay? And so something else about human brains is our brains are programmed to look for danger, to look for what's wrong in our environment, right? So when we were living in caves and bears were a big deal, we're hiding from tigers, whatever, it was, it's part of our survival that our brain is constantly scanning our environment for danger. So our brain, we're not aware of it, but is always just checking the environment and looking for things that are wrong or out of place. That is what all of our brains do all of the time. So this is why you always notice when someone leaves a sock on the floor, or they leave a light on, or they don't put the toilet seat down, or whatever. We always notice things that are wrong. And it really helps when bears were a big issue for humans, but in relationships, this can be challenging. So for example, when my husband and I got married, we registered for silverware. And you know how they come with the big forks and the little forks sometimes, right? And I think there's purposes for both, and I don't know. So we had 2 different size forks, and we even had sections in our utensil drawer for each size, right? And for whatever reason, my husband could never tell the difference, right? We kind of split doing dishes and unloading the dishwasher and putting it away. And he would always mix them all up together. So like we had conversations where I'm like, you see a fork is bigger than the other fork, right? Like so every time I would see it, it would kind of bother me. I'm like, this is not where the fork goes. And it's so silly, but I would notice it every time, right? But then when you think about it, like if he did it correctly, I would not notice because I wouldn't remember that it had needed to be unloaded and that he had done it, right? If he did it correctly, he would get nothing. Not a thank you, nothing. But if he does it wrong, now he gets this lecture from his loving, nagging wife, right? Which then leads to not great connection or not great for our relationship, right? And so this is often what we do with our kids. And I want you guys to know that we bought new utensils and we have one size fork now and we're good, okay? So it is much better. But we do this with our kids all the time, right? So when our kids are playing happily together, reading independently in the other room, doing, not screaming, talking at a regular voice, they're walking instead of running around the house, we don't say anything, right? Sometimes we even like sneak off to actually get some laundry done or some dishes done or get something done. But the problem, and then the second we hear a yell or a slap or whatever, then we run in, right? And it's like all the attention is there for that wrong thing, right? And so this again is how our brains are set up. But the thing with kids, with all humans, but especially kids, is like it's kind of like little plants, and whatever you are watering is what's going to grow. And so you kind of can imagine a plant for like some of the negative behaviors, and the water is your attention. So if every time your kids are yelling or running or fighting or whatever, that's immediately when you come in and give them some correction or talk to them about it, you're kind of watering that negative behavior with your attention. And then you have this other plant for positive behaviors. And if we're not giving just as much praise or just as much or even more praise and attention for all the right things they're doing, or even for when they're doing like neutral things, like nothing wrong, then that plant sometimes doesn't grow very much because we're not giving that as much water and attention. So the key is really to kind of change the way our brain works, which does take more than me just telling you about this, right? But it's kind of resetting our brain to try to catch all the good things. And this is great for kids, but it's also great for your partner, for friends, for any relationship. Like you want to be around the person that's always looking for the good things you're doing and noticing those things, right? And so something that I'll have my clients do if they're really trying to change this habit is like you can set an alarm on your phone. Set it on vibrate so your kids don't know, and set it for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. And every time it goes off, you just look up and look for something positive or even neutral, right? Just not negative. And then you just notice it. Hey, I really like how you guys are playing so nicely together. Like, wow, I love the art that you're making right now, right? You're using an inside voice. Thank you, right? Thank you for walking to your room. And you're just looking for any opportunities to give them attention for doing things that you like. Does that make sense? Any questions on that one? All right, this is so powerful, but it does take really intentional like retraining of your brain. But it's very possible. Like you can retrain your brain to kind of think like this, but it does take some intentional work. But if you just think about how great that would be if you can notice all those things that your kids are doing, because most of the time, usually, they are doing okay things or good things. And that's what we really want to be focusing on. Any questions for that one? All right. So when you think of the challenging behaviors that we wrote down at the beginning, and so we just had everyone write down maybe 3 things that have happened the last week or day or whatever that were kind of challenging situations, and have like a mental picture, or Dr. Evan might get you scratch paper if you want, or put it like on a Post-it on your phone. Perfect. Okay, you're ready. I'm going to give you guys like 1 minute just to think about when you go through those 3 scenarios. Could you have been focusing on the good a little bit before it happened? And could that have helped? It doesn't mean that this one tool will work for all of your scenarios, but it's a good like exercise to kind of think about. Maybe there was things that we could have praised and that would have helped. So you guys can talk about it with each other, write it down, just think about it. I'm Melissa, by the way. What's your name? Hi, Betty. I'm happy you're here. No worries. No, I'm happy. I know. Thanks for coming. I know it's hard. Good job. You did it.
You pulled over, I'm gonna be like, this is very good class. I gotta go.
Good. No, I'm very happy that you made it. I know it's hard to get up. And tell me about your kids. How old are they? How many do you have?
12-year-old boy.
12 boy.
My daughter will turn 10 in November.
When is your daughter's birthday?
November 29th.
Okay, they have a son turning 10 in December, and my oldest is turning 10 on November 14th.
Really?
Yeah.
I hardly ever meet winter babies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone's in the summer.
Yeah.
So she's like,
Okay, so 14 and almost 10.
12 and 10.
12 and almost 10. Okay. And they're all boys. I have one girl. You have one girl. Okay.
All the boys. My boys live better than my girls.
All right. Any questions about this one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I like it just.
easy. We're like, what's
This is easy. I think it depends. I don't know. And everyone I work with, I don't see boy-girl trends. It just seems like depends on the family. But some people swear that some are easier than others. Any questions on this one? Now that you guys were discussing it more? All right. All right. So the next tool, so that's like, imagine a tool in your tool belt now is trying to focus on the good and catching your kids being good, right? The second tool I want to give you is using really clear expectations and instructions with your kids, okay? And so there's different ways we can do this. This works for all ages, and I'm going to try to give examples for all of them, but if you need it tweaked a little bit more for your 12-year-old, then tell me. But there's different ways that we can just kind of set it up. When we want our child to do something, how we present it to them can really make an impact on whether they will comply or not. So the first tip is to use priming as much as possible. And priming is just kind of a fancy word for using warnings. So kids often have very little control over their life, especially when we have like the little young ones, right? Like we tell them when to eat and sleep and poop and, do everything, what to wear. And as they get older, they have a little bit more say over their lives, but not a lot. And so something that can be really frustrating or just hard for kids is when there are quick transitions and they don't know what's happening. So
That's a big one.
yeah, yes. So what we want to do as much as possible for our kids is to just give them a heads up of what's coming next. So sometimes this looks like a family calendar, if you can keep it updated visually everywhere. I have a hard time keeping mine updated, but that can be really helpful. Talking about the plans for the day at the beginning of the day, and then especially when your child is doing something they really like doing, giving them some warnings that their time is about to end, right? So, if you're at the park with your kids, like, hey, we're going to be leaving in 15 minutes. Hey guys, 5 more minutes. Okay, 1 more minute and then we're leaving. That kind of preparation can really help your kids just kind of know what's coming. And so like from an adult perspective, you could think of it as if you had this boss and it's like Friday at 3 and you kind of already have, the rest of your workday planned out. You kind of are caught up. You're going to take it easy. You have dinner plans with some friends, whatever. Like this is your day, right? And then your boss comes in and is like, oh, hey, I got this project on Monday. I really need you to finish it. It's due Monday. And they just stack this big thing of papers on your desk, right? Like you're going to be mad about that, right? Like he knew before, you wish you could have known before, you already kind of saw how your day was going to go. Now it's totally changed. You're going to have some strong feelings about that, right? And our kids have that too, right? Especially when they can't control it. And that doesn't mean that we don't leave the park ever if they have strong feelings about it, right? It just means we want to give them a heads up of what's happening as much as possible. Do you guys have any questions on that one? All right, so it can be different at different levels. What's the youngest we have again? 4? What's your youngest? 4, okay. So yes, with 4, that can be really helpful with the transitions. Oops, what's happening with it? My hair is attacking it.
Yeah, the hair is going to stretch.
Okay, is that better? Thank you. So this just can be really useful. And then for older kids, it might just be like verbally, hey, here's the plan for today. But I will still give my almost 10-year-old warnings, like if screen time's ending, right? Like I'm always going to let them know kind of what's coming next. The next thing is sometimes we tell our kids to do things and they don't listen. and we think it's because they're choosing not to obey us. And sometimes they are choosing not to obey you, but sometimes it's that we didn't actually have their attention and they're not listening to us, right? And so sometimes we as adults, and I see this so much, we kind of yell to our kids from across the room. Maybe they're really involved on their tablet or watching TV or in a book, and we just yell to them something, and then we don't get a response. So then we yell louder, right? And now we're getting all frustrated because we've told them 2 or 3 times. And again, maybe they really are ignoring you, but more often than you think, they honestly didn't hear you. Like some kids will look, like sometimes when I do these trainings, and maybe even you guys are even looking at me in the eye and making eye contact, but your brain is thinking about something else other than what I'm saying, right? Like we all do that. So just know, even if your child is looking at you, they still might not actually be thinking about the words that you are saying. So what I will usually do is I will try it how I want to the first time, right? So maybe I'm just saying their name and calling from across the room. If I don't get a response, as the adults and as the speaker, that's on me. It's my job to change what I'm doing to get a better result. So I should not just keep yelling louder, right? I should move over to my child. So I will get closer. Sorry, I'm gonna invade your space a little bit, right? If they are looking at their tablet or at the screen, like a really quick way to get their attention is you just put your hand over it really fast, right? Like I'm not taking it or blocking it, I'm just like covering it, and then they're like, whoa, now I'm gonna have some beautiful eye contact because I just kind of blocked what they were interested in. And now I can repeat that, right? And then now if they just ignore me or say no, then okay, that's a different issue. But I wanna make sure they actually heard the expectation before I start feeling mad or frustrated or like want to move to like, they're not listening to me, I need to handle it. Does that make sense? Sometimes you can also just have your child repeat it back if you're not sure. So like my oldest, the way his brain works, because every kid's different, is I can say something from across the room and he'll say nothing. And then I'm like, hey, did you hear what I said? And then he can tell it to me exactly. He's never looked at me, he never responded, but he heard it and it's in there and he can say it right back, right? So like for him, usually I can just call across the room and I just do a quick check that he's got it. I'm not like making him look at me or come over or anything. But if he isn't listening, then I would, or doesn't repeat it back, then I would change what I'm doing, right? So you kind of want to know what works with each kid and with each moment and how involved they are in the activity that they're doing. Do you guys have any questions about that one?
So
No?
we're good listeners.
Yeah. You're good. Oh. Another trick with this is we want to tell our kids what to do instead of what not to do. And so for this, what I want you guys to do is just right now, all of us together, I want you to not think about your toes. Just whatever you do, don't think about your toes, and definitely don't wiggle them. Don't think about wiggling them. Don't think about your toes. I want toes nowhere in your mind. Don't think about your toes. Don't think about your toes and don't wiggle them. Okay, so who was thinking about their toes for most of that time, right? And so the reason why is because I kept saying toes, right? Even if you were like really trying to participate, I'm saying toes and it's making your brain think of toes. It's eliciting that image or that word automatically in your brain. And I keep repeating it. So even if you try to push it out of your brain, it keeps coming right back because I keep saying toes, right? And then you always have the personality, like my husband jokes, like my husband has the personality, if there's like a big red button right there that says do not push, he's like, well, now I gotta push it, right? So also like you might elicit some of that if I'm like, do not wiggle your toes. And so if it's hard as adults to do that when we keep repeating the word, just think about for kids. So for kids, if they are running and we say don't run, they need to stop what they are really enjoying doing. They have to think, okay, if I'm not going to run, what should I be doing instead? Okay, I'm going to change course and do that, right? And often, even if they are like so sweet and motivated and they're trying to do all of that, by the time they're processing all of that, you probably repeated, hey, I said don't run. And now they're like right back to starting all over again, right? And so it's really like how we phrase it can be really powerful because their little brain is not going to be able to do all of that work to pick an alternate behavior. And often we say don't run because in the moment, that's what comes out of our mouth. And it takes us more work to think of, oh, wait, how do I say that positively, right? And if it takes us a second to figure out how to phrase it positively, it's going to be much harder for them to figure out what they should be doing instead. And so I don't know if I have examples of this one. Nope. So some examples of that one, like running, would be like use your walking feet or walk, right? Use an inside voice, use a quiet voice, right? Please be kind, be polite, right? Use a lower voice. Like, what do you want them to be doing instead of like, don't be rude, don't yell. Because again, we're like making them do a whole lot of work to figure out what we want them to do, and we're trying to get them to stop doing something they want to do. And that's just going to be really harder for them. Any questions for that one? All right. Okay, so here's my example for you guys, right? So Coach Lily's gymnastics class takes place in a noisy gym. She stands up in front of the class and yells, "All right, everyone, we are done with cartwheels for today. How about we all come and sit down?" So everyone but Marshall listens. She tells the class to come sit down again, but Marshall keeps doing cartwheels. She yells, "Marshall, come sit down," even louder, but he still doesn't listen. So for this example, do we think Coach Lily used these strategies? So like the first one is priming. Do we see any indication in this scenario that she gave them any kind of warning that fun cartwheels are ending and we were going to come sit down? Like there's no warning, right? It was kind of like all of a sudden, cartwheels, which maybe was Marshall's favorite thing, is over, and now we have to come sit down, which maybe is his least favorite thing. Do we think she has his attention before she gives that instruction? It sure doesn't. It doesn't seem like it, right? Yeah. She does not know. And then she's not changing her behavior. She's just yelling louder, right? So we honestly don't know if Marshall heard her or is just happily cartwheeling and doesn't know that anyone is talking to him. And then the last one is telling him what to do. Does she tell him what to do instead of what not to do?
She does. She says,
Yeah.
"Come sit down."
Yeah, she does. So this one she actually does well. She at least says, "Come sit down," instead of just stop cartwheeling, right? She's giving him something else to do, which is great. Another tricky one, especially for your younger kids, like for the 4-year-old. So this sentence, "All right, everyone, we are done with cartwheels for today. How about we all come and sit down?" That's just like a lot of language for a 4-year-old to process. And so when we're talking to younger children, or sometimes we have kids with processing delays or language delays, we want to keep our instructions a lot more to the point. Like just keep it short and sweet, right? "All right, cartwheels are done. Come sit down." Like those are all the words that you need to know in that instruction. So that way your child can work on just hearing those words and processing those words. Now, like for their overall language development, use all of the words in wonderful language in other times to give them all that great exposure. But if you are giving your child an instruction, particularly one that they might not like, keep it simple. Which again, we're used to talking to adults more, so sometimes we say things very long. And so with especially younger kids, try to keep it short and sweet. Any questions about that example? Has anyone seen this happen? This is like literally based on a gymnastics class, and my son was Marshall. So
I wanted to comment.
Yeah.
You can relate to this. You have 3.
yeah,
And their ages are different.
Mhm.
It's hard to use, one technique all of a sudden, and sometimes when they're 3 together, because when they outnumber you, and then you want to spend time, with all of them together,
yeah,
because you haven't seen them all day long, and then
Yeah.
it's like you got to work or talk this language with a 9-year-old,
Yeah.
and then a 6-year-old, and then a 4-year-old, and it's like all of a sudden it's difficult. That's the most difficult
Yeah.
part.
no, 100%. My 2 older kids are both like higher needs, and I have to parent them completely differently to like meet their needs. I have to talk to them differently. I respond when they're upset totally differently because that's what they need. So I have them, and then I have a 2.5-year-old, right? Which is also different than an older kid. So it's a lot of like, as a parent, switching to be like, wait, who am I with and what do you need right now? And it is not easy.
Yeah. So maybe later on, if you have a point of how to, because that,
Yeah.
for us, I think that is the most challenging. Is to how to focus on either all of them are together
Yeah.
or separate,
Yeah.
because I haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, it's just really being curious about what works for each of your children individually and kind of doing we'll talk a little bit about it, trial and error about what works for each child. And then you as the adult having to switch with who needs what in that moment, which is challenging. And then if you have more, it gets more challenging. I think in general, like another one of my tips that's not in here, but I'll try to save it at the end if we have time. Okay. Another one of my favorite tips. So how could maybe using clear expectations and instructions help the challenging behaviors that you guys wrote down? So I'll just give you 1 minute to look at what you wrote down and Were there clear expectations? Was your instructions really clear? Did you have their attention? Did you give them warnings? And maybe could that have helped that situation? All right, so those strategies that we talked about are things that you could be using all the time, right? And if you do use them consistently and well, that will reduce the amount of challenging behaviors that you see, but it's still going to happen, right? Now the pictures are like, the sunscreen wasn't enough, or we forgot it, and so now we got to put the aloe on, we send out the little life rafter. I know it was like a helmet and now it's a cast, but like, you get it, right? It's happened, now we're kind of dealing with it after it happened. And so when you are in a challenging behavior, I'm going to give you 4 kind of steps to go through to address it, right? There's lots of different challenging behaviors, and the way that I respond to it, like if I couldn't just be like, tantrums, this is what you do for every single tantrum, because it depends on what your child, right? What they're trying to get out of that, how old they are, where they're at. So instead, what I'm going to tell you is kind of the steps that I recommend you go through anytime you are in a situation of a challenging behavior. And those steps are staying calm, redirecting, providing choices, and then evaluating how it went. Okay. So the first step, stay calm. This is the hardest step and the most important step, right? So often what happens, let's say your child is having a big meltdown in the grocery store. Okay. This happens to all of us. So right now your child is there, meltdown, grocery store, right? Often what happens is then we are very caught up in our own experience, our own thoughts, our own feelings, right? Maybe we're thinking, everyone's looking at me. I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe they're doing this. Like they already had candy today. I'm not buying them another candy. I'm so mad. This shouldn't be happening. Maybe, oh my gosh, my friend is over there and sees me. I'm mortified, right? Like we are very much kind of in our own experience of what's happening in that moment. And that often evokes a lot of feelings, right? And then if we are feeling strong feelings, we're usually going to react, maybe by yelling, maybe by snapping, maybe doing things that aren't going to be actually effective in managing the tantrum, because we're kind of reacting out of our own, what's happening inside of us, okay? Very human. Dang it, thank you. My hair does attack things. So it's very human and normal, but it's not the most effective way to actually respond and have the tantrum stop in the grocery store. So instead, what we want to try to do is be able to stay calm. So we need to be able to kind of switch our brain from going into that like crisis mode into being able to stay using our rational brain. Because when I was right here thinking all those things and feeling all those things, right? My brain is now, I'm in that emotional part of my brain. I'm like down in my lower brain. It's all emotions. It's very reactive. And even if I know all these tools, because it's tomorrow morning and you came to this training tonight, if you are in that emotional part of your brain, you can't access all the great parenting books you just read and all the advice that Melissa gave. You can't even use that part of your brain because you're feeling so emotional. So the first key is to stay out of that emotional part of your brain. And so like I recommend like taking a deep breath sometimes can help. Like it can be quick, right? A little bit deep breath, like saying a prayer if you pray, having some kind of little mantra like, I'm okay. It's going to be fine. We're okay. Like whatever you need to do that works for you in that moment to try to keep your brain working at its rational level. And then we'll make time later to think all the things and feel all the things. But in the moment, if you are having a strong emotional reaction, or your child's having a strong emotional reaction, that actually makes the child's tantrum worse. Because now they feel that you are very upset. And now they were already upset. And now they're like, uh-oh, mom's upset too. Something is wrong. Feeling like this isn't okay. And it can kind of start this vicious cycle that makes it a lot worse. And then that triggers you and like so on, right? So we want to take a breath in, take a breath, take a pause, and just know it's not personal, right? You could be doing, it's never personal. It's not personal. It's about what they're going through and what they're trying to communicate in the moment. right?
Okay.
So part of it is fully believing that it's not
I'm gonna
personal.
remember that.
Yeah. Like you can do all the right things. You can be me and have all this experience and education and still have my kid tantruming in the grocery store, because they do, right? So it's not that you are a bad parent or you're messing them up or they're a terrible child or they're doing it to get to you. They're just having a hard time right now. And yeah, we just got to help them through it. We want to try to hold space for the child's experience. So trying to stay out of thinking about all of the things that we're thinking of in our head. And instead, if we can stay calmer and more rational, now I can try to be like a scientist or a detective. That was not the reaction I thought. I didn't think that would result in, boogers all over the grocery store floor, right? I wonder what happened. I wonder why he was so upset about that. Okay, I guess we did have like snack a little bit later. Maybe he's more hungry, or oh no, we were talking about this before. Maybe he's really upset about that. Okay, what should I try now? It seems like he really wants this. I think this might be the best way to calm him down in this moment. Like if you can stay calm and kind of approach it like that, not taking it personally, just like, okay, he's having a hard time. What's going on? What's the best way to help right now? Your brain is going to give you much better solutions, right? Than if you are in that emotional kind of self-blame cycle that we all get sucked into. So that is the first step. You are just going to be able to use what you've learned tonight, what you know about parenting, all the things so much better if you can have a habit of catching your brain before it freaks out too much and bringing it back to like, what does my child need in this moment? And how can I do that for them? Any questions about this one? It is possible, I promise. It's not easy, but it's very possible. All right. So the next step is redirecting. Okay. And basically redirecting means right now my child is very focused on X, right? They really want screen time, right? For our older kids. My child really, really, really wants to keep playing video games. And I said, it's time to stop. And that's all he's thinking about. And he's really mad about that. So, there's kind of two different ways you can do redirection. The first one is distraction. This works a lot better with younger kids, right? Like with a little kid, you can just be like, oh, look at the squirrel. And they're like, huh? And they're like happy again, right? Like it's like all you do with babies. So with younger kids, that's still like a super viable option. It's just if they're really upset, usually I'll show some empathy, like, hey, you're feeling really mad because what was my son mad about? Oh, my son was really mad this weekend because we were watching Paw Patrol and Marshall, I think, walks on the ceiling and he really wanted to walk on the ceiling. And he's 2.5. He's so mad that he couldn't walk on the ceiling, right? So he's like crying and upset. So I'm like, oh man, you are so sad and mad. You really wanted to walk on the ceiling with Marshall. All right. Hey, can you come outside? Let's go check the mail. And now we're fine, right? Now we're outside, we're listening to the birds, we're counting flowers, like we're fine again. We're like over the fact that like I can't have him walk on the ceiling. With older kids, sometimes it's just restating the expectations. So kind of already having in place like clear rules, maybe for your family, this is what we do. Like for screen time is a common one. Like in our house, you have to do X, Y, and Z, and then you can earn 1 hour of screens. But like chores are done, homework's done, you did everything you're supposed to do in school. Like there's like kind of a list that a literal checklist they have to do to earn their screens, right? And then when it's over, they already know it's done. And so since that's like a system and a rule, it becomes a lot less of a daily debate because that's already the rule. And so if they are a little bit mad, I can be like, yeah, you really wanted to play more. You are feeling frustrated. You love it. Like you really want to play more. And then I will be like, hey, but the rules, our time's done. And then maybe I will try to redirect. Okay, you're really thinking about screens. Like how about we go play Monopoly, right? When they're into like Uno is very big in my house. We play a lot of Uno, right? All right, well, why don't we play Uno? Right? I'm going to try to redirect and help them if they are really focused on whatever that thing is. How can I redirect that in a different direction? If your child does start to cooperate and they start calming down, you want to use that as an opportunity to praise them, right? I love how you're calming down. Thank you so much for playing Uno with me. You handled that really well. I know that was really disappointing that screens ended, right? We want to make sure, again, we're finding any opportunity to catch our child doing the right thing or the okay thing. Any questions about this step? Right. So if that does not work, which it does not always work, right? Like now it's just happening, right? They're having the tantrum, they broke the rule, whatever. The next step is really to try to avoid a power struggle. So that was a wonderful facial expression. So a power struggle is any time that you are are like kind of using your authority as an adult, like you will do it because I said so, right? Like I see it as like we're almost like it's like a push and pull, like you will do this. And they're like, no, you won't. And like, yes, you will. Like, right. If you're doing that, you're in a power struggle. And if you have entered into the power struggle, your child has already won, right? We don't want to parent and have our child doing something because we happen to be taller and bigger than them right now. Because not actually teaching them anything about obedience or how to live their life or make good decisions. It's just teaching them, hey, if you're bigger, you can make people do stuff. And you're not always going to be bigger than them. And so there's actually a lot more skills we want them to be learning in the process until they might be bigger than you, and it doesn't work, right?
Almost like where the bullying starts.
Yes.
It is
That's
sometimes,
exactly
yeah, right. Because those kids might not be learning all the skills of negotiation and how do you, cope with when you don't get what you want. It's just like, nope, if you're bigger, you win. And that's not what we want to teach our kids. That's not good for them at all. I like to think of it as like, like the courtroom dramas where you have like the negotiation and there's like the big table in the formal conference room. And like, there's like one side on one, like the attorney person on one side and the attorney on the other side, and they're like facing each other. So if you feel like your kid's on the other side of the table and you're like arguing, like then you're in a power struggle. The key is you want you and your kid to be on the same side of the table. You're on the same team. And the problem on the other side of the table is that we just can't walk on the ceiling, right? That is the problem. The problem is that we've used up all of our screen time today and we're mad about it, right? The problem is you really wanted candy and that's not available, right? The problem is not between us. The problem is over here and I'm on your side and I want to help you solve it. And we create that by giving our kids choices. So if your child isn't listening, you want to know, like have choices available, right? If they are refusing to do their homework, what you want to be able to do is be like, hey man, we got to do your homework today. You know it's due. You get a choice, right? You can do your homework today and earn your screen time and have lots of fun, or you could choose not to do your homework. We're not going to do screen time. We're going to have a boring afternoon and probably your teacher's going to be upset tomorrow, right? I know you love screen time. I really want you to get your screen time. Like I'm here to help you. You tell me what you pick. Right? That would be more for like our 10, 12-year-olds. But you can see how that's going to really help your child. It's going to help your relationship with them a little bit more. It's going to help them make a better decision, think through consequences more, and it's going to take away some of that power struggle. And there might be some days where they choose not to do their homework. And then they come into contact with, okay, now I didn't earn my screens. I had a boring evening and I got in trouble with my teacher. And that might be how they need to learn the consequences of things, right? And I would much rather them learn now when they're 9 or 10 versus when they're 18 and are experiencing that for the first time. So the great thing about offering choices is you still pick the choices, right? You still pick things and you give it to them. So you are still in control. You can still decide, right? Like, if you don't put your seatbelt on, we're not going to your swim lesson, right? Like you make that choice, right? But you're also really helping your kid make a decision, feel more empowered, and kind of being more on their side, less likely to get into that power struggle. And then when they do make any choice or start cooperating, again, you praise that. All right, thank you for picking. Okay, you made a choice. Cool, let's see how that goes, right? Like either way, you try to stay neutral and on their side. Any questions about this one? The last thing is a step that no one really talks about, and this one is so helpful. This one's not hard. It's just remembering to do it. Anytime you do have one of these challenging behaviors come up, you want to take some time to actually evaluate what happened. And this is, again, putting back on that scientist hat, that detective hat, and just think about what happened in a non-judgmental, factual way, right? So questions I like to ask in this evaluation is like, okay, what happened right before? Why were they upset? What did I do? What did they do? Like, do I like how I responded? Do I want to do that again? Do I want to try something differently? Has this happened before? Does it seem like it's getting better or worse? What can I try next time? And if you have a partner who's on the same page with you, it's great to pull them aside. So sometimes if I'm handling a big meltdown with my kid and my husband's kind of watching or managing the other kids, right? Afterwards, we'll be like, hey, what do you think? Like, was that the best way to respond to that? What should we try differently? Then you guys are both on the same page and you kind of learn from someone that's not in the middle of the situation. And then the great thing about that is then every time it happens, you're learning from it. You're not just doing the same thing over and over and hoping that somehow they change, you're changing how you're responding each time and then measuring and tracking if that actually helps or not. And so then sometimes all the grocery store tantrums don't seem quite so bad. Okay, this is another piece of data. I try to learn from last time. Is this going to help or not? Let's see. Well, I'm going to try this and then think about it after, talk about it after, and come up with a plan. And now it's just all like, okay, it's just data and I'm learning each individual kid, what works for each individual kid in each behavior. And then of course they get older, their behavior changes. And so now you are constantly changing with them and learning what they need in those moments. You guys have questions on this one? Has anyone tried this one before? Okay.
I do have a question, but it might
Yeah.
be something for a later time.
Sure.
What about co-parenting? Like, for instance,
Yeah.
stepdad.
Yeah.
How does that look like? What does that look like in the situation?
Yeah. So as much as you can, you want to try to do this. It just really depends on the other party.
I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
one kid is not your kid biologically.
Right.
And they've got another parent in this scenario.
Yeah.
And you see unhealthy behavior and you
Right.
want to help.
Right.
And you're seen as, wait, you're not my dad, you're not my mom.
Right. Right.
How do you handle that?
I mean, I think that's something that you and the biological parent would really want to be on the same page about. Like, what is the response? Because ideally, you guys are responding the same way to a lot of it, especially for younger kids. It gets a little bit trickier with older kids. But I would just want to be on the same
So I'm
page.
assuming that you've seen it work multiple ways.
Mhm,
It just
yeah.
depends on what the biological parent
Yeah.
is okay with.
Right.
Just real quick on that, would maybe like setting clear expectations be good? So
Exactly.
Instead of it being like, hey, I'm chastising you, it's more, hey, this is what we
Right.
have. Real quick example, I heard of this guy who has this company and
Mhm.
he has his, I think it's like core values or something
Yeah.
on the warehouse wall.
Exactly.
And if the employee is doing something wrong, he's not like, hey, you're doing this wrong. It's like, hey, what is number 4 core value up there say? It says we do this. How is what you're doing different from that? So it's not him being
Yeah.
the mean boss towards the employee. It's
Right.
just kind of a reminder.
It's redirecting.
Like, this is what the expectations are.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful example. Thank you for sharing that. And what you want, this is a separate training. It's so hard to fit everything in 1 hour, guys. But I have another training on just creating family rules, because that really is like kind of like the path you're setting for your child, right? Like, this is where we're going. And ideally that's rules that all the parents are on the same page with, regardless of their relationship, like what is everyone's rules? What are our rules as a family? And that way you're not on the spot figuring out what your rules are when your kid is yelling back at you or refusing to do something or being disrespectful to the step parent and the step parent doesn't know how to respond, right? Like, the more we can figure out this stuff in advance and kind of have really clear communication on it. We teach our kids the rules in advance. We practice our kids with them. We do silly role plays with them. Like, here's the rules. We're always going back to them. We're always talking about them. And then if they break a rule, they're not surprised, right? They're like, oh yeah, I know you talk about the rules every morning, Mom. I know. I'm so annoyed by you talking about these rules, right? Like, when we go to the grocery store, we go somewhere, we're like, okay, what are the rules for gymnastics class? We listen to our teacher when they say we stop doing cartwheels. Yes, right? Like, we're constantly setting up those clear expectations. But yeah, I mean, I think co-parenting could be a whole other day-long thing, right? But I would say it's a lot of communication and just being on the same page about roles, about who does what, as much as possible. And it depends kind of what the others, yeah. You just control what you can, I guess. Sometimes there's situations where I have clients where their spouse is not on the same page with what they're doing, and they're trying to be consistent and they just can't. And in that case, like, you just do your best then, right? And if what you're doing is really working, often the other parents will come around and see, okay, wait, I do see a difference. I do want to try that, right? Sometimes people need to see it working before they're like really willing to change what they're doing. Any other questions about that one? Okay, I'm going to skip that for time. So what I do is I'm a parenting coach, right? So I worked professionally for schools and in-home. I ran an in-home company. And now what I do is I help parents do these things, right? I work individually with parents on knowing the best way to respond to each kid, regardless of all the things that they're doing. I help them evaluate some of those challenging behaviors that come up, right? And so if you do need another person to be like, hey, my kid had this meltdown in the grocery store. Here's what I did. What do we do? I can kind of talk you through that, right? You don't have to read all the books. You don't have to Google all the things. You have someone that's already read all of that and seen everything and gonna be like, hey, I know you, I know your kids. This is what's gonna work. Try this. And it's gonna talk you through that. And then I also really help my clients figure out kind of why some things are so triggering, right? Like, why does it, like being late is a big trigger for a lot of parents, right? And so that might make you really upset if your kids are making you late. And so we talk through a lot of those triggers so you can just decide what you want the rules to be in your family, what's important to your family. What do we need to let go of? What do we want to keep and teach our kids? And so if you are interested in learning more about what that would look like, I would love to talk to you more about that. And so if you guys wouldn't mind pulling out your phones and just scanning this QR code, this will, if everyone could do it, I would just love your feedback on this training. I'm always trying to make it better, so I would love to know how I can improve it. If you want, you can join my email list by opting in. If you would like that free mini coaching session, that 25-minute kind of individual follow-up, you can opt in there. And then if you want to know more about parent coaching with me, that is a consultation. It's a free 90-minute call where we talk all about what's going on. I dive in, we come up with a plan that you feel great about. And so you can opt in on all of that on the QR code.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. That is,
Do I get to wrap it up now?
yeah. And then I'm happy to answer your question. I don't know if people need to leave, but you guys had a great question about kind of what to do with all the different kids. Do you guys want it in like 3 more minutes?
Please.
You guys okay? Okay. So one of the best things that you can do for that is try to spend 5-10 minutes every day individually with each kid. And if you can't do it every day, spend 10 minutes with one kid that day, and then the next kid, and then the next kid, and rotate. And work it out so that you guys each have, and it's hard with 3 because then you're outnumbered, right? And you're trying to do it. So you just do your best. And during that 10 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever you can do, you are not correcting, you're not instructing, all you're doing is doing whatever they want to do. So you're wearing the princess hat, you're cooking in the little kitchen, you're playing Uno, you're listening to someone talk about Roblox for a long time, and you're just like enjoying them and letting them be them. And you're noticing the things you love about them, you're finding things that you can praise or that say you like about them, and you're connecting with them. So doing that as much as you can is just one of the most powerful, like one-on-one is one of the most powerful. And I have 3 too, so I totally get it. But that is like kind of the most helpful thing to find that connection amidst all the chaos. That was even only 1 minute. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So that was great. I think that these classes are just not only a parenting skill, it's a human skill.
Yeah.
And the reason that we have these kinds of classes in the office is because it's all about having healthy lifestyle is more than just your body, right? It's also your heart, it's your mind, it's basically living the kind of life that you want to live. So thank you so much for coming out.
Yeah.
And glad to be able to have you here. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you for hosting and for all the great work you're doing as a chiropractor and helping my spine. I think you guys already know him, but oh yeah, please.
So as you were saying, like for example, you find out that they were on screen time longer than they were supposed to. Okay, so clear expectations.
Yep.
They know the rules.
Yep.
So you're like, okay, so no screen.
Yep.
And then the attitude comes
Yep.
up or whatever, and you're like, okay, then what? So then if you're like,
Yep.
okay, now you need to go to your room and calm down.
Uh-huh.
I'm not going to. Okay, well don't go, and then then there's just a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not necessarily they don't know, it's just they don't know what to do once they do that.
Right.
And then they don't like the consequences,
Right.
even though they know there's consequences.
Right.
And that's when the struggle happens.
Totally. So, and if some people need to go, like feel free, but I'm happy to answer. I can stay. So I'm happy to answer questions. So like for that, you want to kind of have your plan in advance of what you're going to do. So if you say go to your room and they're not going to, like you can't make them.
Yeah.
Right. So like you don't want to keep
So I just like,
using
hey,
that.
okay, well, it's going to be longer. And they're like, fine.
Yeah. So that is it, like exactly a power struggle, and it's maddening. So in those moments, what I try to do is I try to focus on the feeling that they're feeling. So like sometimes it's just like a 9-year-old having a temper tantrum, right? And so if like when my 2.5-year-old's having a temper tantrum, like I'm not like, oh well, Marshall's a cartoon and like he's not real and we can't walk on the ceiling. Like I'm not rationalizing with him or like expecting him to calm down. I'm like, man, you're really upset right now because you really wanted to walk on the ceiling. And of course I think that is silly, obviously, but he doesn't, right? And so if my child loses screen privileges because he snuck screens, which has happened, like and he's super mad about it, I'm like, yeah, you are really mad. Like, you feel so upset. You're mad at me. You're kind of mad at yourself. Like, you are so overwhelmed. Like, I'm so sorry. That must feel really like icky to feel like that, right? And maybe they're saying things that I would not normally want them to say. But in that moment, if they're so escalated and heated, they can't even hear that.
It's almost
Right?
the red zone.
Yeah.
Once they get to the red zone,
Right.
it's like,
so you
be
know,
like, I'm
yeah,
gonna take away all your toys.
right,
Fine.
right.
They
So
don't
that's
care.
why we're not
It's like-
talking to that when they're in there. I'm not rationalizing with you. I'm not even correcting that much. We'll come back to it later when you're calm. And I might say, hey, that really hurt my feelings, how you talked to me. Like, that was not okay that you said that. Next time you're mad, what can we do? But when they are seeing red, they're not rational. So I'm not rationalizing with them. So I'm trying to show empathy for the emotions. And then if I can, maybe redirect it. What else? You're mad. Let's try to get this out. Can we go for a run? What can we do together if you want? Do you want time for yourself? Like, here's your choices.
Well, and that's
Yeah.
where before, when you're talking about having an individual time with them,
Mm-hmm.
where you're bonding with them,
Mhm.
where they feel like you love them,
Yeah.
you care about them, then you have that as a solid foundation when the trials come.
Yeah.
And then you're like, hey, I'm on your team. I'm
Right.
sorry that you made that choice.
Right.
I love you.
Right.
I want to help you. And then they can remember that, hey, this person actually cares about
Yeah.
me. They spend time with me. They're interested in what I'm interested in. It's
Right.
almost like that foundation has to be there. Otherwise,
Yeah.
then it's just a conflict.
Yeah.
They just hate you.
But that happened to me like 2 months ago. And it was like a terrible day where I was going to let him do lots of extra screens because there was like other stuff going on and I knew it was a hard day. And then he broke a rule and I almost cried more than him. I was just like, no. And yeah, but it was like, this is still the rule. And like, I'm still here for all. I know you're mad. You're mad at me. You're mad at you. You're not looking forward to your day. Yeah.
Is it better like if things aren't working to then, I don't know, like even a tantrum in the store,
Mhm.
the threatening it all doesn't work. Nothing. It just escalates it.
It just escalates it. It might work temporarily. Like, you'll have people go in like, if you don't stop right now, or someone uses a really like forceful voice or like yells, like that often does get kids to stop in the moment. There is research to show that. But long term, that doesn't work. It's not teaching them anything to do instead. You're asserting your authority. You're scaring them a little bit. You're taking something away. So you're not like giving them the skills to actually cope with that better next time. And it does hurt your relationship when you do that, or you're trying to like use that power. So yes, you'll get people that are like, oh, stand up straight, do this, do that. And like, oh, they only respond if I yell. That's not actually a thing. All the research shows they just do that because you have a history of yelling, and that's like, they don't take you seriously until you yell, but that's not actually the best. There's no kids that like respond better to yelling.
So what does it look like when you've got the screaming child in the store
Mhm.
and you've got they're making a big scene
Mhm.
or they're destroying something?
Yeah.
What does that look like in your book?
It totally depends on the kid. Like, I think I would look more at the adults. That's what I do, right? I'm like, is the adult staying calm? Is the adult trying things? Does the adult seem confident that they know what they're doing, right? So sometimes it might mean I'm picking you up and I'm taking you out of the store. Sometimes it might mean I'm sitting with you on the floor and we're going through this together. Like, it really depends on the kid and the person and like what works and what you're trying. If there was a magical, like, do this every time, anyone that's selling that to you is lying. But as someone that has seen all of the behaviors from lots of different kids, I can tell you that I would respond really differently depending on the child. Mm-hmm.
Is it better sometimes when the kid is upset to say, go to your room and then, calm down? Or is it better to just be next to a child as opposed to sending them away to the room? Because what I've heard in the past is that when you send them when they're little and you say, go to your room, and then as older they get, and then you can't get them out of their room because they are used to going to the room, and then they're like, can you get out of your room? And they're like, no, I'm just going to stay in my room. Sending them to the room that they were living.
I think I've seen that same parent. It was like a reel or somewhere on parenting. It depends. So some kids need a quiet space to calm down. So I have a child like this. I have a child that if I'm there with him, he'll keep talking to me and escalating himself. And I've even tried. And then the second I leave, 2 minutes later, he comes out and he's fine. Right. And he's been that like since he was a baby. And now he's almost 10. I have another child that if I like can't calm down on her own and needs me there. Right. So I need to be kind of near her. Like, she needs that comfort. She doesn't have the skills yet to soothe on her own. And so for that child, I'm there. You want to be, when you're there, you want to be really careful about what you're doing and how you're giving attention. So there is like a lot of like nuances to kind of how you're responding, but it really depends on the kid you have, and probably you have different types of kids in your
All
house.
three.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's why it's so hard.
They're so different.
Yeah,
My
that's
daughter
why
and my
it's
son
hard.
are completely different.
Exactly.
Completely
Me
different.
too. Yeah. So it's knowing what works for each one, and then knowing it's going to change. Because all older kids are going to want to be in their room a lot, right? Like that doesn't mean that you like failed when they were younger. If they like, that's like a normal developmental thing for your high schoolers to like usually want to spend a lot of time on their own or talking to friends or whatever. But yeah, we want to just see if how you're responding is working. All right. Thank you guys so much. And then, yeah, now you guys have my info. And so I'll email you in the next couple days.